Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Denise Boston, and welcome to a Racial Equity, a Call to Action webinar series. This evening, I have a wonderful guest joining me, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about the series. Again, my name is Dr. Denise Boston. I go with the pronouns of she and her. And I created the series in order for me to have an opportunity to talk to some wonderful community stakeholders and change agents who are facilitating efforts to spearhead our community action of change and creating equitable and inclusive communities. And so this is the second in the series for this fall. And I am very, very, very fortunate and honored to have as my guest Ishaan Busireddy, and he will be joining me right now. So welcome, Ishaan.
Thank you, Dr. Boston, for having me today. It's great to, have this conversation with you.
And thank you. And I'm excited about our conversation. We've had many conversations in the
Yeah,
past.
yeah, of course.
And we know each other because we both sit with the Martin Luther King Holiday Commission. You are a student commissioner
Yes,
for the past, this is your second year, is that correct?
sounds right.
Sounds right. You are a senior at River Hill High School.
Yep.
And you also invited me, that's why I'm returning the invitation, because you invited me to be a guest at your TEDx talk.
Yeah, I mean, not only were you a guest, obviously you were a speaker as well, so
Mm.
there's that. So yeah, thank you for returning the favor in this manner. I mean, I enjoy conversations actually, probably more than just standing on a stage, so that's good.
I'm really happy that you like to talk and that you are a person that engages people in conversations in so many different venues. But we'll get to that because I want to
Of
talk
course.
about all the great work that you're doing out here. So, but I want to start out with kind of an icebreaker for our audience. Okay. So I want you to share with us three things that you are doing outside of being a senior in high school.
Sure. I mean, definitely, I think you already touched upon one of them. I'm the student commissioner of the MLK Junior Holiday Commission for Howard County. So we obviously work on several different civil rights related initiatives in the community, for example, like food drives, essay contests, etc., celebration. But I'm not going to include that in the three because that's a little bit of cheating because you already said it. So I think one of the most important initiatives that I've been working on and that I founded for the last since eighth grade really was House for Sprouts, and that's my nonprofit. We work on establishing gardens and agriculture at schools across Howard County in partnership with other community organizations. It's kind of stemmed out of the fact, well, first of all, my family has agricultural backgrounds, so I always was kind of exposed to things like gardening in our backyard. But then I think I took that for granted until maybe in third grade. About then, we were introduced to like the school's version of agricultural education, which is growing a plant in a cup. I can't even remember what plant in a cup in a windowsill, and then the staff would water it for us, and then we had to consider that as agricultural education. So I kind of founded this so that I can give. I was always kind of I was never satisfied with that happening. I that always kind of when I see problems like that, it always just kind of like annoys me until I do something about it. So I decided to do something about it. Decided to renovate the garden at my middle school for a quarter, and then we spread out from there to about a dozen other public schools in Howard County. So we've
Wow.
extended much greater opportunities to hundreds of students now and in the future. So that's kind of one thing that
Okay.
I've done, of
Thank you. You have
course.
two more.
Yeah, I do have two more. Um, so obviously, the other thing that you mentioned was TEDx, which I'll actually talk about that third. But the second one is HOCOYAC. So that's the Howard County Youth Activist Coalition.
Mm.
We are a network of dozens of student-led organizations across the county, and our central team, we basically advance student-centric reforms in Howard County. So the major accomplishment that we've had was we drafted an amendment to policy 9010, which is for attendance, so that students can have discretionary absences for civic engagement. So let's say you want to engage in like a march or some type of event during school hours, because I mean, you don't want students to be excluded from the democratic process. I think that's just, first of all, undemocratic. And also it's barring them from unorthodox educational opportunities that they may benefit from in their career and professionally. They can even share that expertise with their fellow classmates. So now, because of the amendment that we're able to draft and also pass successfully and unanimously through the Board of Education, students can now request from their principals or administration day of absence for those opportunities. So definitely, we're really proud of that, and we're advancing similar reforms. We're thinking about things, for example, like related to first aid programs for student athletes, mental health, all of that. So that's the second one. And then for the third one, I obviously talk about TedX, founded the official TedX event at Riverhill High School. And it's not really just a Riverhill High School thing. It's included students and speakers from across Howard County, really, and also audience members. We've had some pretty interesting speakers like yourself and also Dr. Ball, some grassroots or organization leaders, scientists, just very passionate students. So we've had a wide range of different speakers. It's all about, I think, we were all in our own bubble during the pandemic, and I really wanted to help bring us all together in an interesting way that I found unique and entertaining as well. So that's kind of the impetus for that, and we've had that 3 times in a row, and we're looking forward to the fourth one.
In 2025?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
lovely. Very good. Well, I'm just so impressed by the work that you are engaged in, and it sounds like you're very conscientious about changing, the status quo, and
Yeah.
looking at innovative ways to make a change and for young people to be involved. And so that's why I was really interested in having you as a guest this evening, because I think you can inspire other young people.
Mhm.
Um, I have a question before we get to our questions, and
Sure.
then we'll
Of course.
open it for Q&A as well
Sure.
too.
Sure. Of course. Of course.
But who inspired you to do the work that you're doing? Who would you say inspired you? I know
I
your
would
mom, so I know your mom is a big advocate.
Sure, sure. But I think actually one of the most early influences on me was probably her father, my grandfather. His story is very inspiring. Like he came from a like agricultural family, very far from any urban center or education. He had to like walk. He had to first of all live with his relatives. He's the first person really in his family to like go for a more a formal type of education. He wanted to become an electrical engineer, and he had to live with his relatives, and they made him do like housework on all of that to stay actually at their house. And he then still had to walk miles for school. They didn't have pencils. They had to write with sticks and sand to learn math. It's just like that type of tenacity, and then just how like wise he was in like a lot of different subjects just kind of inspired me to also be, you know, very intrepid, but also multifaceted in these different disciplines. And I think what also inspires me to do what I've done is I very much enjoy learning about history. So I've seen that history is very much the confluence of many different communities, but it's also the daring initiative of many different individuals. So I think that dual understanding of history kind of motivates me to, in whatever small context that I find myself in as well, try to be an individual that has that daring initiative that then inspires the community. And then lastly, I think what inspires me the most also about addressing these different problems is just the problems themselves, and just seeing how there are issues that are not in the mainstream that are extremely important. I mean, agriculture, for example, is just one of them. If I'm going to touch upon that very briefly, it's just that you have the average age of a farmer going up to like 58 now, and we take it so much for granted where our food is coming from, and that agricultural decline, the decline of that way of life, just the fact it's not sustainable, the way that federal policies, for example, are just not aiding them well enough in the modern environment, within the global trade network and all that.
Yes.
It's just about when I recognize issues like that which are not in the mainstream, I very much want to encourage discussion about them in the mainstream. So I think that's definitely one of my main inspirations.
Oh, lovely. And is your grandfather living here? Is he abroad?
Yeah, so he lives in India,
Mhm.
but he does visit for many months. Him
And do
and
you visit him as well?
yeah, I last did that maybe 10 years ago because I
Um,
mean it's difficult because if I go during like the school year, I miss all the school. That's a
mhm,
mess. And then
mhm.
if I go during the summer, it's like 110 degrees.
Oh,
I don't like that. I'll go this time though. I'll go this time.
well, he sounds like a wonderful role model,
Yes,
and
yes,
I'm happy that we thought of him this evening. And
of course.
so my first question to you is, and I think you're saying it. I mean, I think we're organically talking about this,
Yeah.
but what is your story of community activism? What's your story? If you had to write a memoir, how would you? What would you start with?
I'd probably, well, I'd preface that I was always very much interested in, solving issues as a community and just addressing issues that I see. I've never been a person who just glosses over if I see if something can be better. I always immediately dream of how can we fix that, even if it's not something you can practically do at the moment. I've definitely embraced practicality more, as I grew older. Of course, 3-year-olds think that they can fly with wings, but you know I think I definitely preface just the type of beliefs that led me to down that path, but then I would start it off with that moment. I think definitely House for Sprouts in 8th grade was probably what started any of these types of initiatives and just kind of showed me, kind of
Mm,
proved to myself that I can do something. As much as blunt as that sounds, it's true. You kind of need to do something first yourself and kind of
yes.
have that notice that impact. I noticed the exact impact I wanted to establish. And I think that gives you a lot of assurance that you
Mm,
can do more. And I
mhm,
think everything branched off of that. I mean, I kind of discussed it in our previous part of this discussion. So,
mhm.
you know,
And young people are watching this tonight. What would you say to them? Because a lot of young people may not have the energy or the vision to do what you've been doing. I know you come across all types of young people in your
mm,
journey of working out in the community.
yes,
Um, what would you say to young people who may not have had the wonderful opportunities that you've had, the 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 support that you've been given? Yeah, you know that
right.
those type of young people exist in our community as well.
Yes, of course. Yes. So to that point, I would say it's definitely very uh, difficult for many people to see and observe these instances that inspire them or have these opportunities to exert their talents or even develop their skills and talents in the first place. People are very much, life is very much determined by the information available to you. And when you don't have, or you have the wrong information, or you don't have the right information, or you just don't have anything at all,
Mhm.
it becomes very difficult. So I think for people in difficult circumstances, I think that it's especially true that you need to seize upon the day, seize upon what you see you can possibly do, like even the smallest thing. And
Mhm.
sometimes just because of some factors you can't control, where you were born, how much
Yes.
money you had, or how good the school is in your area, etc., you may have a disadvantage. But I think especially you should not take that as something that is discouraging to you.
Mhm.
I think you should take it as encouragement that you should work extra hard to try to catch up and work extra hard to find the opportunities and really relish and cherish what you do have so that you
Mhm.
can find yet that you don't. And I
Mhm.
think when you use that as motivation, as a fuel to the fire instead of putting your fire out, I think
Mhm.
that is when you can truly succeed. I mean, and I think if you're talking about youth in the United States, I think no matter where you are in the United States, I mean, obviously it's very different, but I think
Yes.
there is still a spirit of opportunity, even in the depths of what may seem like difficult conditions. Uh,
Mm.
And I think people, you can look at people like Booker T. Washington,
Mhm.
you can look at people like Andrew Carnegie. You can make something out of what you may think is nothing, as long
Mm,
as you remember you are something. So I think that is what I would say.
yes. Yeah, I think that's a very motivating way of encouraging young people to see that, your experience is your experience,
Yes.
and how you can utilize and leverage that experience to see around you, to see the ways in which you can really make a difference in the world. Yeah, I moved here to Columbia when I was 14, and I had to do the same thing. I had to look around and say, what can I do
Yes.
to improve myself as an individual and to connect with other people. That's the beauty of living here in Howard County. You have a chance to really be with a lot of different types of people.
Right. I mean, all that development you would have seen, growing up until this
Mhm.
moment, that some of that might just be the status quo for me,
Mhm.
because I was born here, I was raised here, that's status quo for me. But obviously, you would have seen all the work that was put in different individuals that they put in to make that the normal reality for me. So I definitely think we have to be, no matter what condition you're in or where you are, I think you have to reflect upon what came before you, because
Mm.
I think that gives you more gratitude, that because no matter where you are, y- what came before you, it was a condition of progress. uh,
Mm.
Humanity, since the dawn of time, has been progressing. It may be at different rates, but whatever it is, we're still progressing. So whatever came before you was progress until your moment. So you have to ensure you can be progress in for a future moment, essentially.
Yes, of course. I love the idea of understanding your history. I love history too,
Oh, thank you.
and the people that came before us that kind of paved the way for
Yes.
us. I read a lot of biographies. I love
Yeah.
biographies, um, and people's memoirs. So, the work that I'm doing, Ishaan, here in Howard County, is specifically around racial equity,
Uh-huh.
and the ways in which we can really see what is causing some people to flourish and to thrive, and what's causing other people not to do that. So I'm looking at inequities as well.
Yes. Yes.
But from your perspective, from where you are at your age, how would you define racial equity? Just where you
So,
are.
mhm.
Mhm.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, just where you're standing in the world that you are seeing at this moment.
Sure. I mean, I think I try to look beyond, much beyond my specific context, because I think
Mhm.
if I just looked at everything from my context, I wouldn't understand anything, right?
Mhm.
That's like that's like looking at the panorama around you through like a magnifying glass. Like
Mhm.
you can't do that. So I think I try to define racial equity like this. So equity, essentially, just in its basic form of where the word came from, it just means fairness. That's the central component of it. You can define it in a lot of different ways, a lot of different ideologies, politically, different
Mhm.
contexts, but I think its central aspect is fairness. So if you then look at the racial aspect, that means racial fairness. That means fairness of race or the races. So what this means is that we have a condition, an ideal racially equitable condition is where the situation is fair to all the races.
Mhm.
So often when you have the conversation of racial equity, in any country, but especially in the United States as well, because of our historical issues,
Mhm.
we have made, again, great progress as
Mhm.
well. There are countries across the world, again, which have much poorer ethnic or racial justice. But I think when you look at our context, it's seeing that there are racial inequities that prevent us from having a ideal
Mhm.
racially equitable situation.
Mhm.
And then it's mainly, right, as you know, trying to address these racial inequities, to or these like impurities in equity, and then trying to make ourselves more equitable. That's
Mhm.
essentially what it is. And how I view it is, there are two components to this. One of them is the social and less tangible aspect, the more mental aspect,
Mhm. Mhm.
the thinking, the thoughts, the prevailing attitudes of a
Mhm.
society.
Mhm.
And in this aspect, a racially inequitable society is one in which there is widespread prejudice, uh, people of different races in mutual directions against each other or in one
Mhm.
direction
Mhm.
don't view each other as equal.
Mhm.
And this causes harm and it causes a lack of fairness and
Mhm.
justice. So that's the social and thinking aspect. Then, if
Yes.
you go to the tangible aspect, it means that in just literal material aspects, the different racial groups or ethnic groups do not have similar opportunities or fairness in owning property or having material happiness.
Mhm.
So I think it's these two aspects where it's the prevalent attitudes and then also the material situation that determines whether a society, a country, nation, community, from the lowest to the highest level, is inequitable or equitable in the racial aspect.
Mhm. It's a wonderful kind of delineation of the two. You're thinking of behavior and systems that's holding these ideas. And then the tangible, as you're saying, the economic aspect of it, property, housing, employment, things that will enable you to thrive and to feel that you are part of a community from an equity perspective.
Right.
Um, we're working towards Howard County, Columbia, Salvage, Elkridge, Ellicott City, all these areas that make up Howard County. Um, we are such a rich county in so many ways. Um, but I think that I would love to see us come more together, to see each other's richness, to see
Right.
each other's, the different aspects of each of those communities and what we have to offer each other. I think that's the challenge, is to get folks out of their own kind of silos.
Yes, I think that again, when it comes to the attitudes, and actually, one aspect I should also discuss before I discuss what I will say now is that when you're talking about equity and specifically racial equity, it means viewing the fairness in terms of how it affects the different racial groups. That is when it goes from just talking about equity, which can be anything, to
Yes.
specifically racial equity, is when you analyze the lack or presence of fairness in, if whether that's politically, socially, or economically.
Mhm.
You specifically look at it by grouping people based on race and then looking at the race. So I think that's what would constitute specifically racial equity.
That's right.
So then if you look at, you're talking about how we are a rich county, we're one of the wealthiest counties in the whole country, United
Mhm.
States. We're one of the richest subdivisions in the entire world, right? But you
Yes.
still have, even if the poorest of our communities may still be richer than the poorest communities of other areas, there is still inequality or inequity between our different communities
Yes.
across the county. So I think what we have to understand is we need to cultivate a joint spirit where
Mm.
the better off individuals are more willing to understand the experiences of their less well-off peers in their community,
Mhm.
and then the less well-off peers are also attempting to communicate with complete transparency and with brotherhood and
Mm.
sisterhood to their fellow community members, uh,
Mm.
to honestly depict this is our situation.
Mm.
We need to work together, because I think when it comes to actually solving these problems, there are a lot of biases. They can be social and economic biases. The rich might think derogatorily about the poor. The
Mhm.
poor may think the same towards the rich in the other direction.
Mhm.
And then when you're talking specifically about race, especially when it tends that the less socioeconomically advanced individuals belong to certain racial groups, especially minority groups, and then
Yes.
the more well-off people come from other minorities or a majority, which tends to be Caucasian Americans.
Mhm.
Um, what happens is the socioeconomic differences, when there's not proper communication and not peace between the groups,
Mm.
evolves from just socioeconomic prejudice into racial prejudice. So the racial and socioeconomic prejudice, they reinforce each other when you're not having a conversation.
Yes.
You know,
That's correct. And the whole idea is to create a community where everyone feels welcomed
Yes.
and everyone feels that, they have opportunities to have a really a healthy well-being. I look at health and wellness as well,
Yes.
and the quality of life.
Yes.
When everyone feels great, everyone feels great. You have a community that when we go to events with each other, when we're at the Merriweather, when we're at the lake, it's a mutual kind of love fest where we can really see each other and appreciate each other.
Of course.
Yes. Um, in a more organic, not something that is unauthentic,
Yeah,
because we
it's
can,
just
we can
people vibing.
pretend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, we can pretend to be civil to one another,
Yeah.
but it takes it to another level when we really see another human being.
Of course. And I think that when you look at these issues, you kind of have to also understand, you know, uh, you have to two terms, equality and equity, right? And I think equality was used a lot more because I think when historically speaking, you had the first major issue was obviously getting rid of slavery,
Mhm,
and abolition. That was a
mhm,
major issue. So I think what people campaigned for there was that African Americans under those conditions would have their rights equally, in the face of the law as their white American brothers and sisters
mhm.
in the country. But then, if you go further, you again had segregation as the issue, where again you wanted equal conditions because they were making unequal conditions. The fact
Yes.
that the state was making the individuals unequal, which is why we talked about equality. So we want to make them equal legally and in
Mhm,
terms of the state, that being the federal law or the state law, even the local law. But I think why the conversation has shifted to
mhm,
equity instead of equality now,
mhm.
because I think the progressive movement has pushed the word equity, and I will discuss whether I think they're interpreting it correctly, in my
Mhm,
opinion. But I
mhm,
think that the reason why we've transitioned to the word equity is because it would not be fair, because right now what we're looking at is not just a legal issue. It is
mhm,
a social, it's like social attitudes. And I think we've improved a lot, especially my generation,
mhm,
generation after. We've improved a lot from the previous negative social attitudes, I would say. So I think there's a reason for optimism there. But if you look, the other end of the conversation, as I said, is tangible. It's the socioeconomic or economic, uh, the physical kind of material aspect of the conversation. So it's inappropriate to use equality in
mhm,
that aspect, because I think when you try to force a society through some type of authority to
mhm,
make sure everyone is materially equal, we can
mhm,
see that that fails wherever that tries to
mhm,
happen. Because I think it glosses over the fact that different people want different things,
mhm,
different people have different skills, they do different work. So it's really, I think, authority to create like a false equality
mhm,
materially, it
mhm.
always results in more inequality. So I
Right.
think instead of talking about equality, which is literally everything being equal, we're talking about equity, which is more how can everything be fair so that people
Mhm.
get what is according to them. And I
Yes.
think that, right,
Yes.
were you going to say something?
Yes. I'm agreeing. I'm saying
Mhm.
yes. It's important for people's needs to be met where they are.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. And I think the interpretation of that, I think a lot of times, I think this has emerged first from like the civil rights movement and then like the progressive movement as well, which is has some things in common, but some things also not in common. And I think there's also, there's people across the political spectrum who also want to have racial justice. It's not just in the left or the right or the center; it's just across the spectrum. But I
Yes.
think when you have equity in the conversation, I think the misinterpretation of it is that, as you said, right, you need to meet people where they are with their needs. But I think where that can sometimes create or be misinterpreted is
Mhm,
when we start to characterize these groups based on like statistics, or like, oh, you have this much education, or you are this much rich, you are this much poor, and then you kind of assume that certain groups cannot
mhm,
cannot keep up with other groups. So then you kind of make them believe that they can.
mhm,
And I
mhm,
think making people believe that they can is key to
mhm.
success. And I
Yes.
think I think that also it's that you don't it's not about giving people exactly what's needed to equal everybody else, because I think we need to like stop being in a box where we think the ideal situation that being exactly like everyone else is should be key, whether that is racially, culturally, or economically, right? I mean, if we're respecting social diversity, why don't we also respect material diversity? You
Mm,
cannot have a society where everyone is exactly the same materially, right?
yes.
Everyone is to their own capacities, right? But I think where we really need to provide people equity and uphold equity is that based on what they can do in life, or what they see themselves doing in life, or what they have been equipped with. We give them all the opportunities, and then whatever path they choose, we make sure it's fair for them to live that way and contribute to society that way, and then you'll have a proper society. I mean, you can describe that as, I wouldn't describe it as a social free market, because
Mm,
I think that implies the more of like government intervention.
mhm.
But I think it's more freely, we should all understand as individuals and then as a community that that's what equity means.
Yes.
It's not
Very.
a false utopia of everybody being exactly the same, because again, if there's something we need to learn from diversity, it's that we're not all the same, but how can we allow each other to maximize how we are different,
Yes.
and then put that together into the united whole.
Well, sounds like you've been really giving this some deep, deep critical thinking.
Yes.
And to be a young person, to really think consciously about understanding that every human being deserves a right to live and to thrive, with no one holding them back, with
Yes.
opportunities there for them, regardless of where we are on the spectrum of
Yes.
things, is a healthy community, and a healthy person. And young people having that kind of thought process. And I don't know if you're talking to your friends like this,
Mm.
because you sound like you have been doing this thinking for a long time.
Right.
But I hope that young people are beginning to have these conversations as
Yes.
well, and that
I
you're
think they're
seeing it
beginning
in
to
your
have
work.
the conversations. I think that Gen Z, especially, is very politically diverse, in not just politically, but just ideologically diverse, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have so many people. I just spoke the other day, a few months ago, to like a libertarian socialist, for example. A very interesting, very niche ideology,
Mm-hmm.
but that's very real. You have Gen Z believing in a lot of different types of beliefs that are not the status quo. And even if I might disagree with a lot of those beliefs, because they might not be exactly like my beliefs, I think what we have as a consensus is that the existing consensus and the status quo is not working as well as it could. I think that's what we all agree about. So I
Okay.
think we are very we're not afraid to disagree. We're not afraid to be different and think differently, and even think in a way nobody else thinks. I think that's what Gen Z, you
Mm-hmm.
might think that Gen Z is hive minded, and a lot of Gen Z is hive minded because of the media, right? But the other part of Gen Z is the exact opposite. I think that's an interesting thing about Gen Z. But I think we are having these conversations, and I think a lot
Ishaan,
of. Mhm.
Ishaan, do you think it depends on where you're living too? That it's, are you feeling that the conversations are easier living in Howard County? Or this is where you're living and you're not living anywhere else. But as you're thinking about social media across the country, do you feel that young people are in spaces where they can have conversations and have opportunities to be vulnerable and opportunities to have courage around issues, and feel comfortable talking to each other when it's many different views?
I think that in most parts of this country, I think that the media wants to tell you that it's like we're in an apocalyptic situation, right? No matter what side you were on. I know just a few weeks ago, right? Whoever, or maybe a week, 2 weeks, I don't even
Mm-hmm.
know how long it's been. The side which was panicking definitely flipped. But I think that what the narrative that has been pushed is that we can't agree anymore, and we can't talk anymore, and that in, let's say, very blue states or very red states, there's no conversation going on anymore. And I think that's a very dangerous narrative, because it glosses over the fact that we are having these conversations.
Mm,
Society goes on, humanity goes on, and I think that it keeps changing no
mm,
matter who wins in the moment, right?
mhm, mhm,
It's dynamic. That political ideology or faction may not even exist in 10 or 15 years. There's a
mm,
different thing that might come in and replace them. The existing dominant ideologies didn't exist 30 years ago, or they were
mhm,
completely different. So I think that
mm,
you have to embrace the impermanence, is what I like to say, and
mm,
kind of understand that we are having the conversations, and we have to, you can rebel against the system that is telling you we can't talk to each other by
mm.
exactly doing that, by
Yes.
talking to each other. I mean,
Mm,
even if you disagree, the point should not be to make the other person believe exactly the same thing you believe, but
mhm,
rather educate them on why you believe what you believe
mm,
to inform their perspective.
mm. Well, I'm so happy we're having this intergenerational
Of
conversation
course,
right now. I'm a baby boomer.
yeah,
Yes.
that's a very different context, very
Mhm,
different perspectives. But I think
mhm,
given you can inform my generation,
mm,
your generation can inform my generation of
mm.
what came before us, and then my
Yes.
generation can inform your generation about how we're taking that and
Mm,
what we're doing. And I think unless you have those conversations intergenerationally,
yes.
interracially,
Yes.
intereconomically,
Yes.
inter ideologically, unless
Mm,
you do that, you're not going to make progress. Because if you look at the progress that's been made anywhere in any sector, technologically,
mm,
socially, economically, politically, it
mm.
only happens when groups or individuals having different ideas speak to each other and then
Yes.
merge their ideas. If you look at the ideas prevalent in both of the dominant political parties in our country and in the minor third parties as well,
Mhm,
they're composites of so many different ways of thinking.
mm,
Look on in the Democratic Party, for example, you have post civil rights individuals, you have free market liberals to an extent. You have social market people. You have democratic socialist people. You have all sorts of people, and then you even have some maybe libertarian, bleeding heart libertarian people. And then if you look on the right wing, you have uh, religious conservative people. You have libertarian people. You have more nationalistic people.
mm,
You have populist people, working class people now on both sides. You have minorities on both sides. So if
mm,
what you're gleaning from this is
mm.
we actually share things in common. We share some groups that are on both sides that
Yes.
happen to be thinking in different ways a little bit, but and maybe there are some pieces that are not on either side that might be on one
Mhm,
side and not on the other side. But what we have to understand is that we do not have a homogeneous block of two
mm,
factions or more vying against each other. It's a fluid and dynamic
mm,
conversation in which groups are shifting between the sides all the time.
mm. And being in spaces where that's intentional, Ishaan, that these conversations are deliberate and intentional for this to happen. I mean, that's why I wanted to do this webinar to have
Of course.
intentional conversations. Always like having a conversation with you. It's always
Thank you. Appreciate it.
wonderful.
Likewise.
And I learned so much. And I would love to see more intergenerational conversations. So maybe you and I can work on that.
Of course, I think that needs to be formed. I think that needs to be formed not in just because I think actually one thing that
Mm,
makes that very important is that there is a kind of a doom minded.
mm,
It's like they're called doomers essentially,
mm,
which is
mm,
trend among my generation, maybe millennials as well,
mm,
where
mm,
they think that everything in the world is declining.
mm,
But I think there is, and that has actually led also to the opinion by older generations that my generation,
mm,
millennials, or Generation Alpha after us,
mm.
Generation Beta, which will I think be born from next year. That's kind of crazy.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but there's a lack of faith
Mm,
in these generations born since the turn
mm,
of the century, which is that because of mass media, because of the differences of how we've grown up, the way technology has changed our societies, it's just not embracing that impermanence and kind of fearing the change has
mm,
led to a lack of faith in our
mm,
younger generations. And I
mm,
think that needs to be restored because I think that there are things that Gen Z and millennials, especially Gen Z, I think, and not to be any biased at all there
Yes.
as a
Yes.
Gen Z, but
Yes.
I think there are things we do much better than
Mm,
every generation before us. And I think you can say that about every generation. There's
yes.
something that generation does much better than every generation before them.
Mm.
But with a mobile phone in our hands, that itself shows us we had Wikipedia on our fingertips.
I
We had
know.
the whole internet. And that can come with disadvantages too. You
Yes.
have people who have social media addictions, you have people who have insecurities from it, but you have some new bad and you have some new good. And that's how every generation
Mm,
counterbalances each other, which is why you need to have a intergenerational society. Because
mm,
you can it's just like any difference in different groups, right?
yes.
They can complement each other's strengths and fill in for each other's weaknesses.
Mm.
And I think that's why you need to have the conversations.
You know what you're making me realize, Ishaan, is that listening is such a particular skill. I think you and I are listening to each other.
Yes,
And I think that a lot of times people are always anxious to get their word in,
yes,
to get their perspective in, and to be patient and to really listen to what people are saying to you is such an art these days.
it is. It is. I think there is a conviction among many individuals that only what they're saying is correct.
Mm,
And that if you take a second to listen to the other side, this is somehow equivalent to surrender or
mm,
betrayal.
mm,
That's kind of the
mm.
dramatic way
Yes,
that people are thinking about it, because
that's right.
they think if you take a second to even try to understand what the other person is saying, you've immediately betrayed whatever faction or group
Mm,
you've aligned yourself to.
mm.
And I
And
think,
and and what's the optimistic side of listening? What do
right.
you learn? What do you learn when you take the time to listen?
Right, because I think that as if you refuse to listen, you keep reinforcing this insecurity that
Mm,
if you begin to listen to the other side, you'll magically become them or something like that, right?
yes,
But I
yes.
think that discounts the optimistic fact where you can actually do something. This is an option. This is an option that most people forgot was on the table. It's the
Mm,
biggest thing on the table.
mm,
You can listen to a person and just soak in what they're saying, try to understand where they're coming from and the case they're making.
mm.
And you don't, guess what? This is a special surprise to most people now. You don't have to agree with what they're saying.
Mm,
You
mm,
can just understand what they're saying.
mm,
You don't have to agree with anything they're saying. But
mm,
what's important is you understand why they're saying that or believing that, or why they think it's that important for them to say
mm,
that to you. Maybe if you try to do that and you reflect on them, wait,
mm,
I understand what you're saying. I had that discussion with a libertarian socialist, right?
mm,
I can understand why he thinks that resources should be nationalized,
mhm,
and that we should correct the inequalities in society through state mechanisms.
mm.
I understand why he thinks that. I don't
Yes.
have to agree. I don't agree. I think that the individual should be empowered to
Mm,
grasp the opportunities and succeed.
mm,
Uh, that's my opinion. But
mm,
I was able to understand why he thinks that, and then guess what? Because I paid him this due diligence, a due respect, he
mm,
understood why I'm saying what I'm saying, which is
mm,
entirely different from what he said. I think when you do due diligence to each
mm,
other and
mm.
disrespect each other, you
Yes.
disrespect each other in the conversation, you may you may not change at all. And I would recommend you go in with no obligation.
Mm,
You dare to listen, you dare to
mm,
understand, you
mm,
dare to converse without
mm.
the obligation of becoming that person or their beliefs or believing their
Mm.
beliefs. Just
Wow.
no strings attached. Just
Ah.
open your brain and try to think. And maybe you might change. Maybe you realize some of what they're saying is true, or
Well,
maybe
but I think it also causes empathy,
yes,
Sean. You begin to understand with an empathic heart. I want a T-shirt that says "Dare to Listen." I love
I should write that down. Noted.
that. I love that. I love that came
Yeah.
out of our conversation. Dare to listen.
Right. I mean, I think that's what it is. I mean, daring to do the things that you might think are uncomfortable or even shunned in society.
That's right.
is what changes the world and changes people. So I
I,
think the world is people, right? The community is individuals. You change the individuals,
we're coming close to, you and I have been talking
right?
for 45 minutes.
Wow.
Amazing. It's been amazing. And I want to leave it open to our
Mhm.
audience if there's any questions, comments, uh, anything that you're feeling
Right.
coming out of our conversation, please put it in the chat so that we can
That's great.
recognize you and respond to whatever you would like to share with us.
That's
Um,
great.
I'm very interested in your youth led podcast. Again, you're providing an opportunity for people to talk,
Mhm.
Ishaan, and you're on the other side of things because you're an interviewer as well. What is your focus for that program?
Um. Well, I think that it's well, we have some podcasts, but we also mainly also allow them to publish papers and articles in our website and short posts in our Instagram page. I think that with allows them freedom to understand, or not understand, but put out their experiences and their viewpoints. So I think that just giving them the stage from which they can speak, or write, I should say more accurately, uh,
Mhm.
they're able to break through maybe an environment where their voice is not heard.
Mm.
I think that is our main goal. I think with talk diplomacy, that's what we do. So just really, again, as I said, creating conversation, listening to each other, reading what we write. I think that's
Mm.
our main emphasis. So
Mm.
kind of what I just said.
That's lovely. Um, I like to end with and just open it up to what you gained from our conversation this evening. And how do you think these webinars around a call to action around racial equity, how do you
Mhm.
think it will have an impact on our community as we move forward? So,
Right.
how did it impact you this evening, and how do you feel it will have an impact on the work that we're doing in Howard County government, in the school system, in our library system? What's your thoughts?
Sure. Before that, I would actually also want to make a small point, which is that I think what I was hoping we also discussed was, or I can at least say this really quick, is that I think the best way to, in the material angle, um, and even in the mental angle, to heal the inequities in race, or the inequities, I should say, not in race, because no matter your race, I mean, you are human. You should be
Yes,
considered
that's
equal, and that's what we fought for hundreds of years in this country. But I think the inequities affecting the different racial groups, I think, is what I can more accurately say, is a lack of education. Everything comes from the information available to you that you know, and thus affects the skills that you have, and then how others view you as an individual.
mm,
So I think that what we need to really do is understand how the education in communities that are more socioeconomically declined or
mm,
struggling, they need to, and I think this is the problem of the at the federal level, at the local level as well,
mhm,
to understand how we can actually not just, it shouldn't be just a goal of, okay, we have these buildings, we put all the kids in the school because that's the federal regulation, and they just
mhm,
sit there and then
mhm,
they do their classes or whatever. And
mm,
sometimes, it's crazy, right? You have kids just flunking through everything, and then they have no way to get out of the dark tunnel. So
mm,
I think you need to be the light for whichever tunnel they find themselves in. They're not all in the same tunnel at the same place. You have to equip them for something to do after school, whether
mm,
that be directly working, because I think we frowned upon just working straight out of school. Because that might be the first step that they need to do. They might come from a community with high unemployment. They might come with parents or a single parent, or they may not have living parents, even. You have in
mm,
some communities. They even just working straight out of school is a progress generationally, in some of these communities. But I think we've come to understand that only going to college or community
mm,
college is the only thing you can do. And some of them just, they don't want to do that, or they can't support themselves with that. So I
mhm,
think you have to open up to all these types of options to help these individuals integrate in the economy, integrate into society, and then they socially societally and economically or socioeconomically begin to advance and they begin to develop. Maybe if they work for a bit, they start to save or they do well, then they go to community college and then they get an even better job,
Mhm.
right? I think just simply looking at it like that, it is a very most direct way to address this problem that we've forgotten. And you can go look at inner city Baltimore as a
Mhm.
key example of how you've forgotten a lot of communities
Mhm.
and how we can really serve them through public education. So now to
Yes.
come back to, unless you wanted to interject,
No.
ask me. Okay, you asked me about why these conversations are important.
Mhm.
I think it's important because when do we just sit down and publicly broadcast our
Mm.
opinions and thoughts and facts, experiences, and conversations on these
Mm.
subjects? Do we do that? Is there any venue where anybody does that? No. Which is why I think why you're doing this is important. Doing this is very important.
Mm.
What you're doing, because you might talk about this occasionally with somebody, but you don't broadcast this or record this or just have this up there. You don't do that. So I think that the fact you're doing it is a great experience and a great opportunity to start spreading the ideas, right? That's why I did the TEDx, for example. You
Mm.
have to spread the ideas because the ideas are the information. And as I just said, right, the central theme of what I'm saying, one of them is you are the information, your information controls everything. So when you have
Yes.
more information and ideas, there are more actions you can take to solve more different types of issues.
Mm.
I think that's why it's important.
Yes. And what are you walking away with tonight personally
Mhm.
by spending an hour with me?
I think probably the generational aspect, I think you highlighted that more. I mean, I am very curious about that myself, but I think you definitely reinforced that. Um, and I think that it is good also, I take away, sorry, not come across. I take away the kind of feeling that I have been able to deposit the thoughts that I have had, uh,
Mm.
that others may not think or think in the same way. And I think that is very powerful because
Mm.
it encourages you to further share those ideas, uh, and it gives you confidence that people can understand those ideas. So I think that's what I come away with.
And I think, Ishaan, what I'm walking away with is just feeling so honored to be in the presence of a young person who's thinking, who's
Thank
really
you.
thinking in a way that is impactful to yourself and your life. You're thinking about people who are different from you, and you're open to talking about it out loud.
Yes.
I, were you nervous coming on board?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I tend to not be nervous, and I think the reason why is because I have a certain aspect. And first of all, thank you for the honor of being here, very much. I'd like to extend that gratitude to you as well. But I think that I am not nervous because I believe that what I'm doing is the right thing. I think
Mm.
I have courage in my convictions, and I
Mm.
think because of that, I have courage in being able to communicate my convictions. So I think that is what all young people need to learn is
Mm.
that I think they're scared, they're afraid
Mm.
of sharing what they think.
Mm.
They're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of doing this and doing that. But you know what? You know what they should be afraid of? They should be
Mm.
afraid of not speaking and not sharing it. They should
Mm.
be afraid of keeping it to themselves because when everyone fends for themselves and just only themselves, I
Mm.
mean, we are an individualistic nation. But
Mm.
when the individual retreats from the community which they
Mm.
form together, you start to become insular and isolated. And when you
Yes.
do that, this is when democracy, a republic, or a society
Mm.
begins to fade away. So I think the scariest thing is if everyone didn't talk to each other and kept what they were thinking to themselves, and we
Mm.
didn't do anything with each other. That's
Mm.
the scary thing. So
It
that's,
is
I
scary.
think we should, I don't think you should fear anything. I think fear is bad. But if you
Mm.
should be nervous or concerned about something, or
Mm.
even want to fear something, fear that. Fear not being connected and
Mm.
not sharing. And don't
Mm.
fear sharing. Be proud of sharing.
Yes. Well, I'm proud of sharing tonight with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I've learned a lot. And I interview in a way that I don't want to interject myself. I want to hear, I want to
Yes.
listen. And a lot of times we hear talk shows where people are talking constantly.
Yeah.
I love the idea of opening space for us to hear each other. Um, I want you to know that my next webinar will be with a young person too.
Okay.
So I am just enamored with young people, and I'm going to have a young lady in our office, Alexis Hubbard, who is our intern in the Office of Human Rights and Equity.
Huh?
She's going to be interviewing me on the racial equity strategic plan that we are developing here in Howard County government.
Okay. That's good.
And that's going to be on December 2nd at 6 p.m. And even though people may not have come in live with our show this evening, this will be live. This webinar
Yeah.
can be shown on Facebook, so you can share it on your Facebook page. It'll be on our Facebook page. It will be a living entity, so
Yes.
people can come in and listen, and you can share it with your friends and your network, so that they can hear how fabulous this conversation was. Any
Yes.
parting words for our community?
Well, I think I've said quite a bit of what I'd always wanted to say, or what I say in any capacity. So I'm trying to think of something I haven't said. I think I've said a lot of things.
Any quotes? Anything that you have read that has stuck with you? I have a lot of quotes in my head, but I'm gonna leave it up to you to leave us with a quote and why you chose that quote.
I think one thing, it's not exactly related to what
Hmm.
we said. I do remember that John F. Kennedy said that, he was talking about the moon landing. He was saying, we don't choose to go to the moon because it's easy, but because it's hard. We choose to do the hard things. He said something like that in his Bostonian accent. I think he said like it was hard, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? The R is gone from their
Yes.
family.
Yes.
But it's just, I think that spirit can be applied to anything. I mean, he also said, don't think of what your country can do for you, but also what you can do for your country. I think that's more important. That's more important than ever. Those two things that he said. He said a lot of great things. It's because we always have the expectation that the government or the state is going to need to always do everything for you. I think that belief has started to arise, but to rise. But I think that what we need to remember is that the government should be a facilitator of your liberty and
Mm,
your pursuit of your happiness as it was written. So
mm,
you can be empowered to pursue the happiness and the liberty.
mm,
I think that's what we need to understand. It's up to you. It's up to
mm,
everyone together to uplift ourselves. And if you also look at the previous thing, which is doing the hard things, is doing the hard things that change the world. Because whenever you take the easy route, maybe it's efficient. If it's efficient, do it. But if the overall task is difficult, that might mean it's a collective obstacle that you all need to, or you in your personal growth, or maybe the community and the community growth needs to overcome to get to the next frontier. It's always about getting to the next frontier and
mm.
advancing. So I think that spirit of doing the hard things because they are hard
Yes.
and asking what you can do for others in your country, I think we should take that away now more than ever because we've
Mm,
begun to forget them, and we cannot forget that. We need to remember that, not just think about it. We need to live it. We need to apply that in our lives and how you live your life. So you start with something simple and then actually do that.
start with something simple and actually do that. That's your quote.
Sure, I'm sure I made a lot of those today, but it sounds simple. A lot of things I say might sound kind of blunt or like simple, but
Mm,
it has some truth to it, which is
it
why I'm
does.
saying it.
It does. I think that, yeah, I hope that you're writing these down so that you're capturing, what your thoughts are germinating and what your thoughts are just always actively
Right.
engaged in.
No, I have a huge document. It's like 100 pages long of things that I said or think. I'll
Mhm.
let you know when I release volume one.
Okay, I will take you up on that, and I will bring you back so you can share volume one. And hopefully, I'll have something to share with you too.
If I do that, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Ishaan. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. I
I
appreciate it.
wish you all the best in your senior year. I know senior
Yes.
year is a lot of putting things together and thinking about where you're going to go next and what
I
you're
think
going to do.
every year should be like that.
Yeah,
I think every year should be about those things.
You think so?
Yes,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Share this with your friends. Let
of
them
course.
see what we did together. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I'll see you December 2nd, where we will talk about the Racial Equity Strategic Plan. Thank you. Have a great evening.